Sanbonani Dumelang, good evening and welcome to episode 324 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Uzamandungwa Khumalo. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome to the only daily property podcast in the country, helping you on your property needs. Doesn't matter where you are on your property journey, whether you're looking to buy, to sell, to build, or of course you're a property investor, this is a show that helps you along the way. And all our regular viewers on Facebook, on Instagram, as well as on YouTube, welcome back. You know how we do it. Every single weekday, you and I have an appointment at 7 p.m. where we tackle a hot property topic and certainly helps us make better property decisions. I know you can't see me this evening, having a few technical camera issues. I do promise you that I'll be back on your screens tomorrow evening, but I know that you can hear me very loud and very clear. And of course, I want to see that love on our Facebook page, especially those green hearts that you love sending. Also, do share this live. And talking of our Facebook page, and many of you at home know that we're running an incredible competition on Facebook, and we've already hit one of our targets. So the first target was for us to hit 1 million followers, and last week you made that possible, and we now have a community of over 1 million of you on our Facebook page. And the other two goals that we had, and certainly still have, is of course to have 10,000 comments on our on the competition post that is pinned to our Facebook page, as well as to, have a number of you also sharing that particular post. And we certainly are looking forward to those shares. So we're looking for 10,000 comments, and we're currently sitting at 4,900. So do go on to the pinned post on our Facebook page and certainly help us get to the 10,000 that we have. You've also, of course, helped us reach that 1 million mark, and we are very excited for it and cannot wait. Later on in the show, I'm going to share with you some of the great posts that you have shared with us when you were sharing 1 million reasons why you love private property. We asked you, of course, as we marked that 1 million follower mark on Facebook. So during the course of the show, I will share some of the great posts around what your reason for loving private property are. And we're still running the competition where you can stand a chance of walking away with 500 Rand in cash, because we haven't met all our targets. And so until we meet those targets, you still have a chance of walking away with 500 Rand in cash. So do make sure that you stay tuned for halfway through the show when we announce who the potential lucky winner is going to be. If you know that you've entered the competition, whether you've shared that pinned post, whether you have, tagged some of your friends, then make sure you watch us until the end of the show so that you can claim your prize of that 500 Rands in cash. Last week, we had the winner claiming the 2,500 Rands that was in the money bag. So this evening, we're going to have 500 Rands that's in the money bag, and hopefully the winner will be watching us live in order to claim their prize. Well, This evening, we are looking at a conversation that I'm very excited about, especially, and I was even telling our guest off air that this is something that I have, gone through, and I'll share with you just now. We're looking at special general meetings in sectional title communities. And my guest this evening is Zelinda van der Merwe, who's a co-founder and director at TVDM Consultants. Zelinda, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Zoma. Thank you so much for having me again, and congratulations on 1 million followers. That's absolutely amazing.
Thank you so much, Zelinda. And I mean, we absolutely couldn't have done it without, of course, even yourself, the different guests that we have on our shows, from the Private Property Podcast with myself every weekday at 7 to the other great shows that viewers at home are able to watch every single weekday at 8 p.m. So Zelinda, you and I were talking off air, and I was telling you that, when it comes to SGMs, I hadn't attended an SGM until I think it was about 3 or 4 months ago. I attended my first, SGM, and it wasn't long after an AGM that this SGM was called. And I recently attended another SGM, and thought, what? I know that this is one of those things that don't always happen, but we are seeing it happen, bit by bit. There are certain issues that owners want to bring up in an SGM. And I think during the course of our conversation, want to look at what an SGM is, the kinds of issues that get raised in an AGM, and what's so different between an SGM and an AGM. So that's some of what our viewers at home can look forward to. And I think, Zelinda, let's get straight into it. When we talk about a special general meeting, what is it, and how is it different from the annual general meeting?
All right. So we're going to be focusing this evening on sectional title schemes, obviously governed by the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, which refers to general meetings of the members of the body corporates. One meeting being the annual general meeting, which happens once a year within 4 months of the financial year end. And then as many special general meetings as the members or the trustees want or need. That was something that you asked off air. Is there a limit to the amount of special general meetings that one body corporate can hold? And that's there is no limit. So a body corporate can hold a special general meeting technically every 14 to 30 days if it needs to. Obviously, that's a little bit excessive. A lot of body corporates like to hold a special general meeting, perhaps mid-year point as a bit of a catch-up in between the annual general meeting, or perhaps they want to hold a budget meeting where the budget is informally tabled for member comment. Alternatively, there might be some or other type of project that is needed to be raised or attended to, for example, conduct rules or management rules in a body corporate that need to be amended, or even if a meeting is needed to be called by the members, that's a big one. And a lot of the special general meetings that we attend to at TVDM Consultants is ones that are called by a group of members. And in order to do that, a member or a group of members need to get 25% support of their fellow owners, calculated in participation quota, and they need to request that that meeting is arranged by the trustees. The trustees then have 14 days to call that meeting, and if they don't call it within 14 days, the requisitioning group of owners can call the meetings themselves, obviously ensuring that all the check boxes are ticked with regards to formalities, and that's something that we'll deal with as well. And then, of course, that meeting is run by that group of owners, and notice periods still need to be complied with, delivery methods of notices, etc., etc. So there is no limit on the amount of special general meetings. And I think the biggest difference between a special general meeting and an annual general meeting is that an annual general meeting has prescribed business items as per the Act, which you don't deviate from. You can add to, but you can't delete from, whereas a special general meeting can either deal with informal items or formal items and are sometimes called for a very specific reason and perhaps even just for one agenda item. So I think that's the biggest difference.
And I want to reiterate that difference, Zelinda, because I'm sure with many of us at home who are still coming to grips with being owners in sectional title schemes and getting an understanding of our rights and responsibilities as owners, there's so much that we need to catch up on, because unfortunately we don't typically find in our welcome pack everything that has to do with sectional title living. So the core difference between an AGM and an SGM is that in an AGM, there are certain prescribed, issues that need to be addressed. You can add on, but you cannot, subtract any of the issues. And that's a very important thing to note, because in the event where your AGM doesn't have certain issues that are prescribed, there's potential recourse, and Zelinda will even speak to us about it shortly. And then, Zelinda, you were saying that with an SGM, there can be formal and informal agenda items, and sometimes there could even be only one item on the agenda. Perhaps, take us through some of the issues that owners may want to look at or certainly have addressed in an SGM.
Sure. So very often, like I mentioned, a special general meeting is called by a group of owners. And the one that we deal with the most often is the removal of a trustee committee member or members. So in other words, your trustee committee is appointed at the annual general meeting. The chairperson is appointed by the trustee committee members, and they manage the affairs of the body corporate on a day-to-day basis with or without a managing agent. And very often the members are unhappy with either the people that are chosen, alternatively what those people are doing or not doing. So very often the item of business at a special general meeting is the removal and the replacement of one or more of the trustee committee members. We often find that at the last moment, those people that are going to be removed actually step down. One can imagine that you don't really want to be on the firing line at a meeting where people have the intention of removing you unless you are 100% convinced that you've done the right thing and, there's absolutely no grounds for your removal at all. So that's something that happens quite often. Another item that we deal with in singularity in a meeting is the amendment of the governance documents of the body corporate, so the conduct rules or management rules. And the reason that it's often dealt with at a special general meeting on its own, either at the same date, perhaps a bit earlier than the AGM or after the AGM, alternatively on a different day, is that can be quite a lengthy meeting in its own right, as the members are wanting to pull apart basically a draft set of rules and deal with every single issue, one-on-one. So from a time perspective, it might be a necessity to hold a special general meeting to deal only with that item of business. Something else that happens very often is the removal of a managing agent or the appointment of a managing agent. And then, of course, special general meetings can be held for less acrimonious items. For example, when the trustees are actually able to take a decision, but they don't feel comfortable or confident in taking that decision and therefore revert it to the members. So many people think that a special general meeting needs to deal with special business, in other words, special resolutions or unanimous resolutions, but that's not the case. A special general meeting can deal with ordinary business items, so ordinary resolutions that need a simple majority. For example, something that wasn't dealt with at an AGM can be dealt with at a special general meeting, like the approval of the maintenance, repair and replacement plan or the appointment of an auditor or something along those lines. Alternatively, like I mentioned, there isn't even a need for a vote. It could simply be a bit of a discussion and an indicator to the trustees as to where they should be going on a certain project or a certain item of business that the trustees simply want the members' input on.
I am this evening in conversation with Zelinda van der Merwe, who's a co-founder and director at TVDM Consultants, and we're looking at special general meetings in sectional title communities. I want to find out from you at home, if you're in a sectional title community, what have been some of the issues that you've discussed in in SGMs rather? Have you ever had an SGM? I was saying earlier that I attended my first ever SGM, a couple of months ago, and it actually was about removing a particular trustee, and we'll talk about that a little bit after the break, in terms of how do we go about it, what are some of the do's and don'ts, and procedurally how do we ensure that we do it the right way, because I think it's very easy for certain trustees to also have issues with a particular trustee, and all kinds of alliances get formed. So by the time you attend that SGM, it gets quite heated. So we also want to get a good sense of how procedurally should that happen, and what kind of voting, the outcome of the voting, what should it be looking like in order for that removal to actually be valid. We are taking your questions and comments on our social media platforms, and I see all the love that we're getting on Facebook, Utembeka Ndlovu, I see you. Justice Samuel, I see you. Seleni Pillay, I also see you, as well as Obalisa Selane, showing us love there on our Facebook page. And of course, do keep the messages coming. We've got a Megan van Skalbeck saying, sending all the love to us females with those green hearts. Of course, we're still in Women's Month, and part of how we're celebrating Women's Month is only having women as guests on the Private Property Podcast with myself, Uzamantungwa Khumalo. And so throughout the month of August, we're only going to be seeing women throughout the show. And I think one of the other things that I want to actually read as I was saying to you earlier, that we are, we posted on our Facebook page that we want, and I've got some of the great posts that so many of you shared, and we absolutely love the love that you are showing us. We've got a great one here coming through from Urelokok Leti Malib, saying, wow, congratulations, Private Property. I love private property because it empowers ordinary people like me to make the right property decisions. And else, for the best information Zamantungwa gives us on your live podcast, hashtag 1 million followers. I'll be reading more of the great posts that you've shared, telling us why you love private property and some of the things that you love about private property. Just after this break, we're going to go for a quick break, and here we're going to see who is that potential winner of the 500 Rand in cash. And I hope that you're watching, because you know that in order for you to claim your prize, you need to be watching live, and text us down here below. Let's see who the lucky winner this evening is. And the lucky winner this evening is Ulindelani Mabube. Lindelani Mabube, you potentially going to be walking away with that 500 Rand in cash. Make sure that you drop us a message before the end of the live. We have 500 Rands in the money bag. So if you want to walk away with that 500 Rands, you just need to drop us a text. Well, I'm still in conversation with Zelinda Fanamadva. And as I said, after the break, let me go through one more post that you shared with us at home. And this one is from one of our top fan gang members, Zubongwani Queen B Mabunda, saying, my 1 in a million reason why I love private property is the everyday learning from the podcast and the other programs. The beautiful houses at the websites make to work triple as hard. I can write a book about what I have learned here from the competitions, winning the property guide, and making friends. And that's, of course, the 1 million reasons why you love private property that we are running on our page. So do make sure that you drop us a text and let us know what you love about private property. Now, Zelinda, before the break, I said, the first SGM that I attended was, dealt with removing a trustee. And it was quite a heated one because it spilled over from the AGM. And during the AGM, it was an issue that was said, you know what, we'll deal with it in an SGM because it could very easily sort of derail the AGM, and they needed to best prepare for that particular SGM. And we had requested certain information and didn't want to vote on it during the AGM. And so the SGM was called in order for us to address that particular matter. When we look at the removal, particularly of a trustee, because I'm seeing increasingly more and more people complaining about their trustees, or sometimes even certain members who are trustees. Procedurally, what has to be done in order for a trustee to be removed? Because I think this is one of those very contentious issues. Sometimes it's the chair who's been a chair for many, many years and doesn't want to, be removed. So when we then do call that SGM, procedurally, how does it work in terms of removing a trustee?
So interestingly, the trustees are responsible or are able to remove a chairperson. They don't have to go to the members because the trustees elect the chairperson, but you won't be removing the chairperson from their role as a trustee, only from their role as chairperson. So they would still remain a trustee until they resign or until they're removed by the members. So that would deal with the position of a chairperson. If you're wanting to remove a trustee or a group of trustees and you can't wait until the annual general meeting where the trustees automatically retire but can make themselves available for re-election, then the process that I mentioned earlier about getting enough support together to call a special general meeting will take place. So that is 25% of the members calculated according to participation quota, so 25% of the total participation quota of the scheme. So the larger units obviously would mean 25% a lot quicker than a whole bunch of smaller units, and they would need to requisition the current committee of trustees to call a meeting. The current committee of trustees has 14 days to actually put that notice together and send the notice out. And if on technically the 15th day they haven't done that, the group of requisitioning owners can put together their notice and send it out. Because it's an ordinary resolution, not a special, not a unanimous resolution, you only need 14 days notice. If the trustees are going to call it, the trustees by a trustee resolution with grounds of urgency can call it for a shorter notice period, for example, 7 days. But if the members are calling it, they need to send out a further 14-day notice. So basically from the date of the request for the meeting, 29 days or 30 days later, you end up actually having the meeting. The meeting can be held physically or remotely, or it could be a combination of both. Remote attendance obviously being on one of the 110 different platforms out there, telephone, Skype, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, provided that it's a method that everybody is able to access, everybody can participate, and then of course the chairperson of the meeting is able to actually identify and allow to speak the relevant people. The quorum at that meeting, depending on the size of the scheme, if it's 4 or more units, it would be 33.3% of the total participation quota needing to be at that meeting. And then off that quorum, they would then need to pass an ordinary resolution, a majority decision, as the removal of the trustee. An important procedural item is that the agenda for that meeting, when it is sent out via email only, provided the owners have specified that they wish to receive their notices via email. It doesn't have special business or not prepaid registered mail. Actually specifies the intention to remove a trustee or a group of trustees. Interestingly, the notice doesn't need to say why. You don't need to air all the dirty laundry and say, I want to remove the trustees because X, Y, and Z. That is dealt with at the meeting. Of course, if someone is not able to attend the meeting and is wanting to instruct a proxy, they would want to get that information beforehand. Now, if the meeting is called by the trustees, alternatively, if the group of owners had to call it, the members ultimately are going to decide who is going to chair that meeting, and the chairperson of the meeting doesn't have to be the chairperson of the trustees. And imagine how awkward it would be if you were trying to remove the chairperson as a trustee and he was the one or she was the one chairing the meeting. Obviously, they'd be expressing their own opinion from the podium type of thing. So you'd want to avoid that. The meeting formality, we spoke about it in line with a meeting that you mentioned that you had attended, is that the vote has to be done via voting cards. It's not on a show of hands like it used to be under the Sectional Titles Act, and it's also not done verbally. Even if a meeting is being recorded, either audio recording or audio and visual recording like Zoom or Microsoft Teams, you still have to issue voting cards. The Act speaks about, rather the management rules speak about voting cards. Interestingly, that's the only place in the Act that it speaks about voting cards, nowhere else. But voting cards essentially means that the vote has to be recorded in writing, electronically as well, and form part of the records of the body corporate for people to come and inspect and request copies of later on. There needs to be a quorum, there needs to be an attendance that is kept. If the meeting is being dealt with remotely, it can be recorded as well. And then, of course, it needs to be minuted. And when it comes to voting, there's very limited resources that we're able to use in sectional title schemes or community schemes in general. I've been to quite a few successful meetings where a voting app, for example, MeetingPal, is used for the purpose of recording a vote. If you're going to use the chat function or the poll function of Zoom, for example, you need to make sure that the calculations are done correctly according to participation quota. So in other words, on the back end, you're going to have to do all of those things correctly. So there's quite a few formalities that need to take place when you deal with a meeting like that, and which makes it even more difficult if it's going to be acrimonious.
And I think it's such an important one to note, because we're increasingly seeing people wanting to remove trustees, perhaps sometimes even the chair, but certainly trustees, thinking that they're not part of the, they're not making decisions that put the best interest of people to corporate, and they have their own, agenda. And so increasingly wanting to remove a trustee because sometimes of, certain decisions that they've previously made, contractors that got recommended and did work in the complex. There's so many different reasons why people end up finding themselves wanting a trustee to be removed. We're going to briefly also then look at the removal of the managing agent, because that's another contentious one that I've been getting quite a number of questions about. But before we get to that, we're taking more of your questions and comments at home as we look at special general meetings in sectional title communities. And I asked you earlier on in the show if you've ever had an SGM in your sectional title community, and if you have, what were some of the issues that were on the agenda, and how did the SGM go for you in your sectional title community? We've got a comment here coming through from Facebook from Farhana Siddiqui saying, we had an SGM regarding the lack of security in our complex. It went well with the voting, and we voted to get a new security company, and once interviewed 5 companies, one was chosen, and our complex is safer and running smoothly. And it really is that easy, right? You identify a particular issue that cannot wait for the AGM. And safety is such a huge issue. This is one of those issues that you don't want to have to wait a full year in order to address. So many things can happen in the interim. And so you're able to call for an SGM and have it resolved as soon as possible. Now, Zelinda, when we look at then the removal of the managing agent, I've had people reach out to me saying they've had the same managing agent that's running their complex. They're not doing a very great job, or they are unhappy themselves, and a couple of other owners are not particularly happy with the service that they're getting. They also feel as though the trustees are in cahoots with the managing agent, and that's why they haven't been able to remove them. Some don't know how you would even go about, removing the managing agent. What procedurally, again, in an SGM, how would a body corporate then remove a managing agent?
So it's a topic that's very often has a very unfair outcome. I speak from my experience as being a managing agent previously, that sometimes you are removed without there really being a cause in law. So I think the warning to any trustees or any owners that is thinking about changing their managing agents is just to do so carefully, and to make sure that they do so in accordance with the management agreement, and that the expectations of the managing agent are actually in line with what managing agents offer. A managing agent, or rather a portfolio manager at a managing agency, is, a person that might not necessarily gel with a committee of trustees or a group of owners at a particular point in time. And very often we're asked by clients, how long should a managing agent or any service provider actually offer a service to the body corporates? And there isn't any specifics. You could be a managing agent or security provider or an auditor for years and years on end without anything actually being wrong. Of course, if the service provision isn't up to par or not in line with the fees that are being charged or the needs of the body corporate, then that's a different matter completely. So a managing agent can be removed by a trustee resolution or an ordinary resolution if their contract is terminated in terms of their contract. So if there's a breach clause or a termination clause and that is followed to the T, then it would simply need either a trustee resolution or an ordinary resolution taken at a meeting of the members. If it is not going to be terminated in accordance with the contract, or if there isn't a breach or termination clause, or perhaps even not a contract, then it would need to go to a special general meeting, either called by the trustees, alternatively called by the members, like I explained, and a special resolution is needed, and then 2 months' notice is needed to be given as well. So because a special resolution is needed, the notice of the meeting must be sent out via prepaid registered mail and via email. So as archaic as it might sound, you can't simply just send the notice out via email when it comes to special or unanimous resolutions. The notice has to be sent out via prepaid registered mail as well. And when I was a managing agent, we very often used to get 90% or 95% of the returned, unopened, undelivered registered mails coming back to our offices a couple of weeks or months after the meeting. So it is unfortunately a flawed system, but the managing agent or the trustees have to prove that that in fact was done correctly. Interestingly, in the normal course, a special resolution or unanimous resolution has to be taken at a special general meeting called on 30 days notice, whereas in a certain number of cases, there can be an exception to that, where it is called on a shorter notice period. And interestingly, the removal of a managing agent is one of those, as well as the removal of the trustees that we spoke about. There are instances, for example, the installation of prepaid water or electricity meters where the meeting has to be called on a 60-day notice period, and it can't be called any shorter than that. So that's the process should one want to remove or terminate the contract with the managing agent, if, of course, the termination is justified in terms of the level of service, in terms of the contract, in terms of what the members are reasonably expected or reasonably able to expect from the managing agent. And of course, as with any contract, you're wanting first to try to resolve the dispute or resolve the breach, give the parties the opportunity to resolve the breach, because changing a managing agent can be quite disruptive to the body corporate, and very often you have to compare apples with apples and see what you're getting and all those fun things. And there are a couple of naughty managing agents out there that are not going to accept the termination of their contract, are not going to hand over the records of the body corporates, are wanting to fight the body corporates a little bit. So it isn't always a smooth process, but one must definitely make sure that it's done correctly in accordance with the relevant provisions of the Act.
We are taking your last bits of your questions and comments at home this evening as we look at special general meetings in sectional title communities. We've got a great comment. We've got a comment here from Saleni Pillay saying, "We love you, Zama, with green hearts." Thank you very much there, Silani. And a really great question coming through from Umenzi Butilezi on Facebook asking, are we able to request an audit of the body corporate?
Yes, definitely. So the body corporate's finances are audited once a year as part of the preparation for the annual general meeting. So once your financial year end, comes upon the body corporates, the members appoint an auditor, and the appointment of the auditor is actually one of those prescribed agenda items for an annual general meeting. Of course, that auditor that is appointed at the annual general meeting is for the forthcoming financial year if the financial statements are tabled at the AGM. Interestingly, audited financial statements are no longer needed to be tabled as an annual general meeting. It can actually be dealt with at a general meeting. So in other words, you can appoint your auditor at the annual general meeting, deal with the audits, and then come back to the members by a special general meeting. But because audited financial statements only require the consideration of the members as opposed to the approval, most body corporates still try to get the audited financial statements in time for the annual general meeting, noting the 4-month period in which the AGM needs to be held. So the body corporate is audited every single year, except if all the sections are owned by one person, and some of we were chatting about that before, then the requirement of an audit is not needed anymore. But if there are multiple owners, then it is a requirement. And it is also possible to appoint a forensic auditor if there is a need for that. Of course, I've heard that a forensic audit is exceptionally expensive, and one really only wants to go that route if there is genuine cause for concern of mismanagement, it hasn't been properly identified in the audited financial statements, and then of course the body corporate can afford it. So it is definitely possible to have that audit.
Going to squeeze in the last questions and comments on our Facebook page. We've got Colin Jansen showing us some love there with the green hearts, and Palisa Solani asking, in the meetings, do you vote anonymously or do we raise our hands? Let's take it with, both physical and, of course, the digital ones. Many of us are obviously doing virtual meetings, but how does the voting effectively work?
Okay, so voting at a meeting no longer happens by a show of hands, and one cannot say, are there any objections, or we assume nobody objects, or unless you say something, we're going to take it that nobody objects. You have to, at a physical meeting, issue voting cards, which is either, a hand written document or an actual physical piece of paper or a card or a booklet of cards, whatever process you follow, that is completed and handed back in. Alternatively, it can be by means of a voting app. And then, of course, if you're going to be holding the meeting remotely or a combination of physical and remote attendance, then you need to use either a voting application. I mentioned MeetingPal, for example, or you could use the chat function on Zoom or Microsoft Teams. I think Skype might have something like that as well. Alternatively, you could use the polling function, but the calculation of the votes is very, very important, because in ordinary resolution, the votes are taken by participation quota, which obviously the chat function and the poll function doesn't cater for. And if you're passing a special unanimous resolution, it is both in number, in other words, one member, one vote, and participation quota. So then very often the managing agent or the trustee that's running it, or the platform operator that's running it, actually on the back end has to have a separate spreadsheet put in place. I know Vili Rose from Stratifen this afternoon was busy working on a spreadsheet like that I'm sure all the managing agents are very, very good at, to actually then basically convert somebody's vote to their participation quota representation in order to give a proper outcome of the votes, bearing in mind that the outcome of the vote has to be announced during the course of the meeting. Of course, it can be confirmed following and needs to be recorded in the minutes as well. The minutes also need to specify how the votes were taken, who voted what. It's definitely not anonymous. It's actually part of the body corporate records, that if anybody has any debate about whether or not a vote was legally or correctly taken, they're actually able to go and see who was at the meeting, who was represented, quorum, participation quota, and actually have a look at how people voted, and even compare how a proxy was supposed to vote versus how they did vote. So it's very important that all of that is actually done properly and recorded either in writing or electronically for this investigation to happen afterwards if needed.
So Linda, as we wrap up, any final tips for viewers at home when it comes to special general meetings?
So interestingly, I've been going to quite a few meetings, obviously remotely, and some of them have obviously dealt with quorum issues. So I find it very difficult to ensure that a quorum of a meeting is maintained when everybody's cameras are off and their mute buttons are on. And very often we are sitting in our PJs or having dinner or something along those lines and don't necessarily want our cameras on. But it's very important to remember that a quorum of a meeting has to be maintained for the business of the meeting to proceed and for voting items to be taken. It's not just the quorum at the start of the meeting, but the quorum for the duration of the meeting. So if people are not going to participate in a meeting, they're not going to have their cameras on, their audio on, it's very important for whoever that is running the meeting to have a constant check-in to make sure that they still have a quorum, to make sure that people are still there. You mentioned in your situation that somebody had technical difficulties and went off the meeting. That would affect your quorum. So you need to encourage participation. Even if you're going to mute people because of background noise and all that fun stuff, you still want people to be able to participate just to ensure that you've still got your quorum.
And we're going to leave it there this evening. Zelinda, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Have a fantastic evening further.
And that is Zelinda van der Merwe, who's the co-founder and director at TVDM Consultants. wrapping up the Monday edition of the Private Property Podcast with myself, Uzamantungwa Khumalo. Unfortunately, Ulindelani Mubumbe did not message us in time, and so the money is going to roll over into the money bag. So tomorrow evening, you can stand a chance of walking away with 1,000 rands. Remember, if you know that you have either commented, tagged your friends, or shared the post that is pinned on our Facebook page, you want to make sure that you watch the show, because if we call your name, then you need to text us down here below to claim your prize. Well, that's where we're going to leave it this evening with myself, Uzamantungwa Khumalo. I'll be back on your screens with a camera. We're going to sort out these technical glitches tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. Until then, hoping you're staying home and staying safe.